My boss humiliated me in front of everyone, ruined my career, and mocked my dreams. But when I proved I could build my own company, I came back to become his main competition. I don't even know where to start, because every time I think about that day, rage boils in my veins like molten lava. How can someone be so despicable? That man, my boss, the one I foolishly thought had at least a shred of decency, not only humiliated me, he destroyed me. He ripped apart everything I had worked so hard to build, and he didn't just do it in private. No, he did it in front of everyone, as if tearing me down in public was his ultimate power trip. But let's take it back to where it all began, before the humiliation, before the betrayal, when I still had hope. When I got that job, it felt like my dreams were finally coming true. I remember being so excited that I even celebrated with my friends. It was a big-name company with high-profile projects and a team that, at least initially, seemed full of talent and energy. I was ready to give it my all. And I did. In those early weeks, I became the ideal employee. I showed up earlier than anyone, stayed later than everyone, and worked relentlessly to improve everything I touched. I wasn't the most experienced, but I made up for it with grit and an insatiable drive to learn. First, things seemed fine. My boss, let's call him Martinez, was infamous for being demanding, but I thought that was a good thing. He'll push you to be your best, people said. What an idiot I was to believe that. Martinez didn't push people to be better. He crushed them under his boot. Every piece of feedback he gave was laced with just enough venom to make you question your abilities. And like a fool, I convinced myself his criticism was constructive, that it was meant to help me grow. Spoiler, it wasn't. For months, I poured myself into that job. I worked on projects that weren't even mine. I helped co-workers, many of whom were clearly mediocre but somehow still got by. I pulled late nights crafting presentations, analyzing data, or fixing mistakes that weren't mine to begin with. All while Martinez loomed over me with his cold stare, ready to pounce on any flaw. Not bad, but I expected more, he'd say, as if those words weren't a knife twisting in my gut. That line haunted me during every sleepless night I spent perfecting my work. Then came the project, the one I thought would be my chance to shine. Martinez handed me the task of developing a proposal for a major client, one that could catapult the company into international recognition. I threw myself into it. For days, I barely slept, researching, writing, perfecting every last detail. When I finally finished, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. I thought, this is it. Martinez can't ignore this. He'll finally see my worth. The day of the presentation arrived, and I was ready to stand in front of the client and deliver. But at the last minute, Martinez announced he'd be the one presenting. He didn't even make eye contact as he told me to sit in the back and only speak if he asked me to. It was a gut punch, but I still held onto the hope that he'd acknowledge my work. I should have known better. Martinez stood in front of that room full of executives and presented my proposal as if it were his own. He didn't mention my name, not even once. As he basked in the spotlight, I sat there at the back, boiling with anger but too stunned to say anything. Then came the Q&A. Someone asked a detailed question about a key aspect of the proposal, something only I, the actual creator, could explain. Instead of admitting he didn't know, Martinez threw me under the bus. That must have been an oversight by the technical team, he said, smirking as he gestured toward me. The room filled with awkward chuckles as all eyes turned to me. My face burned, my heart pounded, and I wanted nothing more than to disappear. When the meeting ended, Martinez walked out without a word, leaving me sitting there like I was nothing. That night, when I got home, I stared at myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the person looking back at me. I was exhausted, humiliated, and worst of all, starting to believe maybe I wasn't good enough. But deep inside, there was a flicker of defiance. It wasn't much, but it was enough. In that moment, I promised myself one thing. I wouldn't let Martinez have the last laugh. Somehow, someday, I'd get my revenge. That was the beginning of my fall, but also the start of my awakening. Martinez thought he'd crushed me. What he didn't know was that he'd just ignited a fire I didn't even know I had. Little did I realize, that fire would lead to a journey that would change my life forever. I don't even know where to begin. That night, I couldn't sleep. How could I? I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every humiliating detail of what had happened. The mocking glint in the eyes of the executives as Martinez threw me under the bus like I was some clueless amateur. The casual tone he used, as if ruining my reputation was as simple as ordering lunch. And the worst part? The looks on my colleagues' faces back at the office. A mixture of pity and resignation. It was like they all knew this was Martinez's thing, but no one dared to challenge him. For days, my mind couldn't focus on anything else. I tried to go about my work, but his words echoed relentlessly in my head. It must have been a technical error. How dare he? After all the time, effort, and late nights I put into that project, he didn't just ignore my contributions. He made it seem like I was the problem. This wasn't just a bad day at the office. This was a calculated, deliberate move to undermine me. First, I didn't know what to do. Quitting wasn't an option. My savings wouldn't last long, and landing another job in my field wouldn't happen overnight. Part of me wanted to stay just to prove to Martinez that I wasn't some pushover. It was pride, sure, but it felt like I needed to salvage some dignity. So I kept showing up, day after miserable day, swallowing my rage while the frustration and humiliation boiled inside me like a storm waiting to erupt. Martinez, predictably, didn't let up. Every unpleasant task, every doomed project, somehow ended up on my desk. If something went sideways, he didn't hesitate to call me out in front of the entire team, making it crystal clear that I was, in his words, the weak link. It wasn't just unprofessional, it was personal. He started mocking my ideas during meetings, cutting me off mid-sentence, all while the room fell silent with awkward tension. It was like he got some kind of sick satisfaction from watching me squirm. Then came the day that shattered me. We were in yet another team meeting, reviewing the progress of several projects. I had spent days analyzing a critical issue and had come up with a solution I was genuinely proud of. It wasn't just good, it was innovative. But before I could even finish explaining it, Martinez cut me off with a loud, sarcastic laugh. "Is that all you've got?" he sneered, while the rest of the team shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Not surprised. You always expect someone else to do the heavy lifting, don't you?" That was it. I could feel the heat rising to my face, my hands trembling under the table. For a split second, I wanted to lash out, to tell him exactly where he could shove his condescension. But I stopped myself. Not because I didn't want to, I did more than anything, but because something inside me shifted at that moment. I realized that no amount of yelling or arguing would change anything. Martinez didn't care about logic or fairness, and no one else in that room was going to back me up. I was completely, utterly alone. That afternoon, after the meeting, I made a decision. I couldn't keep working there, but I wasn't going to leave empty-handed. If Martinez thought he could crush me and walk away unscathed, he had another thing coming. If I was going to leave, I was going to make sure my departure left a lasting impact. And so I began to plan. This wasn't going to be quick or easy. It would require patience, strategy, and absolute discretion. First, I started gathering information. I paid closer attention to Martinez's moves, his decisions, his connections, his mistakes. I mentally cataloged every misstep he made, every project that faltered under his leadership. I also began to observe my colleagues more closely. It became glaringly obvious how many of them were unhappy, their talents ignored or underutilized. That's when the idea hit me. I didn't just want to leave the company. I wanted to create something better, something that would show everyone, especially Martinez, just how wrong he was. By day, I endured the toxic environment. By night, I transformed myself. I enrolled in online courses about business and leadership, soaked up knowledge on finance and marketing, and devoured every resource I could find about building a startup. I started attending industry events and networking, carefully expanding my circle without drawing suspicion. Every step was deliberate, every action part of a larger plan. For months, I lived a double life. The office was my battlefield, where I played the obedient employee while secretly laying the groundwork for my escape. At home, I was a student, an entrepreneur in the making, preparing for a future I could barely imagine but desperately wanted. It was exhausting, yes, but every little achievement, learning a new concept, making a valuable connection, fueled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Finally, The day came when I was ready to take the next step. I had saved enough money, gained enough knowledge, and mapped out a clear plan. My time at that office was coming to an end, and though the thought of walking away filled me with relief, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something much, much bigger. I don't even know how I managed to keep my head straight during those days, but once I decided I was leaving that company and building something better, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. The frustration didn't disappear, but it transformed into determination, something almost electric. I wasn't going to just quit and move on quietly. No, my departure had to be strategic. It had to matter, not just for me, but for the principle of the thing. I'd wasted enough time being treated like I was less than nothing. If I was leaving, I was leaving with purpose. The office became a performance. I forced myself to stay composed, to give no sign that I was already planning my escape. Every time Martinez tossed one of his petty insults my way, I reminded myself that soon, his words wouldn't mean a thing. I focused harder on my work than I ever had before, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I knew I had to leave with my professional reputation intact. If I was going to compete with them someday, I couldn't afford to let anyone think I was anything less than excellent. But at night, that was a different story. My evenings became a frenzy of planning. I spent hours researching how to build a business from scratch, crafting a detailed business plan, and figuring out every possible angle. I scrutinized every mistake Martinez had made as a leader and vowed never to replicate them. He was authoritarian, dismissive, and toxic. I wanted the opposite, a space where talent thrived and people were respected. Then came the next step, allies. Quietly, subtly, I started reaching out to co-workers. I didn't flat out tell them my plans. That would have been suicidal. Instead, I asked questions. What do you think we could do better? Do you ever feel like we're just spinning our wheels here? Little by little, I identified people who felt as undervalued as I did, people who were talented but trapped in the same toxic environment. Getting people to trust me wasn't easy. Some were afraid of the risks. Others didn't believe anything could change. But the more I talked, the more I found my core group. A programmer with incredible skill, a graphic designer who could bring anything to life, and a project manager who could organize chaos into order. These were the people who would help me turn my vision into reality. Still, I had one big problem: money. I'd saved up a little, sure, but starting a company required capital I didn't have. So I did the one thing I dreaded most. I pitched to investors. I prepared endless presentations, polished every line of my proposal, and braced myself for rejection. It was terrifying, standing in front of strangers, asking them to bet on me. But to my surprise, I found a couple of people who believed in me and my idea. Their backing wasn't huge, but it was enough to get started. The day I resigned was surreal. Part of me felt like I was finally free, but there was also a gnawing fear. What if it didn't work? What if Martinez was right and I was just another nobody with too big dreams? That doubt lingered in the back of my mind, but I pushed it down. I had survived worse, and no matter how hard things got, there was no way I was going back. When I handed Martinez my resignation letter, his smug grin made my blood boil. "So what now? Gonna find another job you can't handle?" He sneered, practically dripping with condescension. I kept my composure, telling him I had plans he'd hear about soon enough. His smirk didn't fade, but I didn't care. I was done. Walking out of that building felt like shedding a skin. But I wasn't naive. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. This wasn't just about proving something to myself anymore. It had become personal. Martinez needed to see me succeed. He needed to see me not just survive but thrive. And one day, when our paths inevitably crossed, I'd make sure he understood just how much he underestimated me. When I finally took that first step away from the company, I felt an overwhelming void, but also a freedom I could barely remember how to handle. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a dark, unknown abyss, knowing I had to jump if I wanted to soar. The thrill was as intense as the fear, and there were days when I questioned if I was truly ready for this. But the fire Martinez had ignited in me kept burning, and I wasn't about to let anything extinguish it. The first few months after I quit were pure chaos, albeit a controlled one. The routine that had once enslaved me was now devoted to building something that truly mattered, something of my own. My small team and I held meetings in coffee shops, co-working spaces, and sometimes even my cramped apartment, which quickly became an improvised office. Cables snaked across the floor, whiteboards were covered in scribbles, and tables were cluttered with half-empty coffee cups. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Every moment spent working together reminded me this wasn't just a business. It was a mission. What we were creating wasn't just another company. It was a direct response to everything we had endured under Martinez's reign. We knew where the cracks were, what people needed, and exactly how to offer something better. Our concept wasn't revolutionary, but it was precisely what the industry lacked. We focused on delivering a service that combined cutting-edge technology with a human touch, something Martinez's cold, toxic management sorely missed. But things didn't go smoothly at first. Problems cropped up almost immediately. Money was running out faster than we'd expected. Prospective clients seemed interested but hesitant to commit, and every little mistake felt like a monumental setback. There were nights when I barely slept, poring over numbers, strategies, and solutions to problems that seemed insurmountable. But as a team, we refused to give up. The easy way out would have been to return to the safety of conventional jobs, but we knew that's exactly what Martinez would expect of us. So we pressed on. Then, things started to shift. We landed our first major client, a big player in the market who decided to take a chance on us. That deal felt like a lifeline. It gave us the financial boost we desperately needed to stay afloat and, more importantly, it gave us credibility. From there, the momentum began to build. It wasn't instant, it wasn't a miracle, but slowly clients started coming in. Word-of-mouth recommendations began to spread. Our reputation was growing. Martinez, of course, had no idea we were building something that would soon compete directly with him. He was too absorbed in his bubble of superiority, oblivious to the signs that his uncontested dominance in the industry was about to face an unexpected challenger. I made sure to stay off his radar for as long as possible, knowing the element of surprise would be my greatest weapon. I'll never forget the day we officially launched our company. It was a modest event, but incredibly meaningful. We invited a few strategic partners, our growing network of clients, and several friends and colleagues who had supported us from the beginning. It was a moment of pure pride, not just because we had achieved what seemed impossible months ago, but because I knew it was only the beginning. Martinez still had no clue what was coming, but I did. We were stepping onto his turf, and we were going to do it with force. Deep down, I knew our paths would inevitably cross again. When that day came, I'd be ready to face the man who had once tried to crush me. This time, the tables would turn. This time, I would be the one in control. I don't even know how to describe the mix of satisfaction, tension, and determination I felt the day my path crossed with Martinez's once again. Ever since I started my company, I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. I pictured it as a dramatic showdown straight out of a movie, with me standing triumphant and him crumbling under the weight of his arrogance. But reality was far more subtle, though no less satisfying. It had been almost 2 years since I walked out of that cold, hostile office, leaving Martinez and his toxic leadership behind. In that time, my company had done more than survive, it had flourished. What started as a small operation out of my cramped living room had grown into a thriving, modern office space filled with passionate, collaborative people. We'd built something real, something meaningful, and the client list that once felt like a distant dream now included some of the biggest names in the industry. Names that had once been firmly in Martinez's corner. The shift started slowly with one email that caught me off guard. A potential client reached out, mentioning they used to work with Martinez but were now looking for a fresh, more innovative approach. That was corporate speak for "we're tired of his autocratic nonsense." I didn't realize it then, but that email was the first crack in his empire. First, it was just one client, then another, and another. Before I knew it, the rumors weren't just in my head. They were in the numbers. We weren't just another competitor in the market. We were the competitor. Clients weren't just choosing us. They were leaving Martinez for us. Not because I sought them out, but because they were drawn to what we offered: creativity, collaboration, and respect. Then the day came when I saw him again. It wasn't a planned confrontation or some orchestrated drama. It happened at a business expo, a neutral ground where both of our companies had come to showcase our services. The moment our eyes met across the room, I saw it. The flicker of disbelief and, for the first time, uncertainty in Martinez's gaze. He wasn't the invincible tyrant I remembered. He looked cornered, even fragile. I walked over, not to gloat but to close the chapter on my terms. Standing in front of his elaborately decorated booth, which was conspicuously empty of visitors, I extended my hand. He hesitated but eventually shook it, his grip stiff and reluctant. "Martinez," I said, offering a calm, measured smile. "Good to see you. I suppose now I understand why you left," he replied, his tone attempting to sound neutral but cracking under the weight of his resentment. His jaw clenched so tightly I could see the tension ripple across his face. We exchanged pleasantries, or rather formalities. I didn't bring up the clients we'd taken, but he didn't need me to. It was written all over his expression. The small tremor in his voice betrayed the fact that he knew exactly how much ground he was losing. The once commanding Martinez was grasping at whatever dignity he had left. The real triumph, however, wasn't in that moment. It came in the days following the expo. A flood of emails and calls came in, many from companies who had seen us at the event and wanted to work with us. These were companies Martinez once boasted about working with. Now they were seeking us out. Weeks later, the rumors solidified into a hard truth. Martinez was downsizing. His empire, the same one he lorded over me with so much pride, was shrinking. Then came the bombshell: Martinez was selling his company. The man who humiliated me, who tried to break me, was stepping away from the very business he had poured his life into. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't need to. My success was louder than any words I could say. The man who tried to crush my confidence had unwittingly forged it instead. Today, as I look back on those dark days of humiliation and self-doubt, I feel something I never expected: gratitude. Not for the pain he caused, but for the fire it ignited in me. If it hadn't been for him, I might never have had the courage to build something of my own. I might never have realized my worth. So, in a strange way, Martinez gave me the greatest gift of all: the chance to prove myself. And every time I walk into my office, every time I see my team thriving in an environment built on respect and creativity, I know I've won. Not just against him, but for myself.